afternoon, folks. I'd like to come at you today as your ticker guy. You haven't seen me on video in a little while. So I thought I'd put this out here on the alleged gun control debate that we're having in this country. And this is a rather one-sided debate, or at least it has been of late. You know, there's the media that we all know what side they're on, right? They think that nobody should have any guns except, of course, for them and the people that they pay to protect them. That would be the police. And, of course, the politicians who believe that they have the right to have armed people protecting them as well. You and I, on the other hand, we should not have any firearms at all, or at least a very restricted set of firearms. Let's start with the Second Amendment itself. It's rather simple. It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You can look this one up. I don't think I need to provide an exact location for it on the web. Second Amendment is pretty well known. You can find it in any copy of the Bill of Rights. I don't think there's a lot of debate to be had about what shall not be infringed means either. Pretty common, pretty basic, King's English, not very difficult to understand. So the debate has always been about what does a well-regulated militia mean, and how does that apply to the Second Amendment? I could go through hours and hours of speechifying about the history of this, especially considering that at the time this amendment was adopted, the Founding Fathers had just gotten done defending their right to keep military weapons and the ammunition for same. And in fact, that's what started the Revolutionary War at Concord when the King's soldiers decided they were going to try to seize the ammunition for same. Didn't work out real well for them. But that's a political debate to have, and entwines itself in dozens of cases, dozens of misrepresentations, and going down them one at a time and deconstructing all of what has happened over the last couple hundred years. We don't need to go there, folks. I just want to point out some mathematics. And then I want to challenge you every time that you see someone in the media or you see someone from Stoneman Douglas, hello Mr. Hogg, or anybody else that wants to come out and talk about assault weapon bans, for example, or restricting ammunition, or restricting the size of magazines one can own. I want you to understand something very simple about arithmetic. There are 330 million people approximately in the United States. Of them, some small percentage, and we'll get into that in a moment, believe that the Second Amendment means exactly what it says, shall not be infringed. Now, I don't know how many people really believe it and how many people just sort of believe it. In other words, I don't know how many people are willing to die rather than give up any of their firearms. Neither do you. But I think we must both agree, whether you're on the pro-gun or pro-gun control side of this debate, that there is some percentage of the population that really does believe this. Let us assume, just for the sake of argument, that that number is 3% of the American population. That is, 3% of the American population will never give up any of their guns, but they are law-abiding citizens otherwise. In other words, they're not gangbangers, they're not drug dealers, they're not thugs, they're not armed robbers, they're not any of those people. They've never committed a felony in their life. However, they will not allow you to define their possession of a particular firearm or a particular kind of firearm as a felony and arrest them for it. They would rather die first. So let's assume that that is 3% of the population. Hell, we can even be kinder than that. Let's assume it's 1% of the population. It's a vanishingly small number, ladies and gentlemen, 1%. How many people is that? Well, that's 3 million Americans, approximately. So if you are a proponent of banning so-called assault rifles, which are really nothing of the kind other than by the fact that you've redefined what an assault rifle is, are you willing to commit 3 million murders? To put some context on this, in the United States today, about 17,000 people die every year from gun homicides. The commonly cited number is that about 30,000 people die in the United States from gun violence. Notice that the gun banners always say gun violence. They never say gun homicide. The reason they don't say gun homicide is because approximately half of all people who die as a result of the use of a firearm commit suicide. If you got rid of all the guns, all of them, literally, you would have quite a few fewer gun deaths, obviously. However, those people that committed suicide using a gun would probably commit suicide in some other way. They'd jump off a bridge, they'd poison themselves using the exhaust out of their car. Somebody who really means it and really wants to die probably uses a firearm to do it. But if they didn't have a firearm, they'd find another way. So I'm going to focus only on homicides. Homicide, very simple definition. It is the taking of another person's life. We're going to use the definition that the FBI uses for firearm homicides. I think that's a pretty good definition, and that would be non-negligent intentional killing. In other words, murder. Now, we don't always call it murder. Sometimes we call it manslaughter. There are various degrees of murder as well. There's premeditated murder, there's non-premeditated murder. But the definition of non-negligent homicide is probably in the realm of what most of you think of when you think of gun violence. In other words, somebody is walking down the street and somebody else comes along and says, "Give me all your money," and the first person says no, and the robber pulls out a gun and shoots the other person, takes their wallet. Okay, that's homicide, as you and I think about it. Or in the case of what happened at Stoneman Douglas, somebody walks into a school, pulls out a gun and starts shooting people. That is homicide. So I want to boil this down a little bit further because the FBI has some amazing statistics which you can find in the Uniform Crime Reports. And they tell us that approximately 1,000 of the 17,000 to 18,000 gun homicides every year are committed with rifles. Out of those, approximately 100 homicides are committed every year. And there's a lot of error band on this because, of course, in Las Vegas, we had that terrible shooting out there. That was a lot of homicides all at once, right? But out of the 1,000 homicides that are committed with rifles every year, about 100 of them are committed with these assault rifles that people want to ban. That's 100 homicides. One homicide is too many, ladies and gentlemen, and you're never going to get me to argue the other side of that. I think only an insane individual would. But now let's put some figures to this. In order to attempt to prevent 100 homicides a year, the people who would tell you that we cannot have these firearms, that civilians cannot possess them, are willing to commit 3 million homicides. I want to put some context on 3 million homicides. First off, all of these people are unwilling to commit them themselves. Those that you see marching and screaming about more gun control, we can even include people like Charlie Rangel, okay, politicians of various stripes. None of them are willing to come to your home and commit a homicide themselves. Oh, no, no, no. They will order somebody else to do it. Police officer, a member of the military, a National Guard, but they themselves are not going to come to your house and kill you in order to get your gun if you tell them no. They're going to send somebody else to do it because they're too spineless to do it on their own. However, they're willing to order somebody else or goad someone else into committing 3 million homicides. A little historical context is in order here. I think you can divide 3 million by 18,000 and figure out how many years worth of homicide, murder, these people are willing to commit to get what they want. I just want to give you one other piece of context. In 1994, there was this little country called Rwanda. About 15 years prior, they passed a law banning personal ownership of firearms with very limited exceptions. They registered every single gun in the country, they went door to door and they collected them. And very few people armed themselves and resisted. In fact, almost none. Rwanda, of course, does not have a history like America, where 200 some years ago, we threw another government out, and we did it by picking up, guess what? Guns. This was all for the public good. In 100 days in 1994, having disarmed the population, one group of Rwandans slaughtered 1 million of another group of Rwandans. Literally. There are those people who call this a genocide. It was not, in fact, a genocide. It was the slaughter of a bunch of people who were politically different. It was not an attempted extermination of a race or of a creed. And by the way, religion doesn't really fall into this because religion is a choice. A race is not a choice. You are born with a race. You are not born with a religion. You take one up. You may be instructed in it by your parents. You may pick it up as an adult. You may choose a religion. You may change your mind during your life. You cannot change your race any more than you can change your sex. So we had 1 million people who were slaughtered. During the reign of Nazi Germany in World War II, estimates are that somewhere around 6 million Jews and other people who happened to like Jews were rounded up, loaded into boxcars, slaughtered, exterminated. They were killed in places like Auschwitz. This was, at the time, a terrible thing. And by the way, prior to that happening, Germany passed, you guessed, a gun control law. They confiscated firearms. So to put this willingness of the American left in context, those people who argue for gun restrictions, gun bans of any kind, and are willing to put them into the force of law, knowing full well that some percentage, some small percentage of the American population says, no, we will not give them up. You're going to have to take them out of our cold, dead fingers, is proclaiming a willingness and an intent to commit mass murder on a scale somewhere between that of Rwanda, in which 1 million people were shoved in the hole, and Hitler's Germany, in which approximately 6 million people were shoved in the hole. Maybe, if that number, by the way, is not 1% in America, if it's 3%, then they're willing to commit more mass murders than were committed during World War II by Adolf Hitler. And they are willing to do this for what they claim to be a political goal. So before you allow any of these people to have a public forum, before you allow them to stand in front of a camera, before you allow any of them to have so much as 5 minutes of airtime anywhere, whether it be in front of a school board, whether it be in front of your city council, whether it be in front of your town hall, anywhere at all, you need to ask them and insist that they answer the simple question: are you willing to murder north of 3 million Americans to get what you want? Because if you're not, then sit down and shut up. You're making noise. And if you are you going to go do it yourself? Do you understand that if you do that and the rest of the American population says, this is wrong, that you may provoke a civil war? Do you realize that you have declared an intent and a willingness to commit mass homicide on a scale that was seen in places like Rwanda and Nazi Germany? Is that really what you support? If you're a member of the American left that wants to take guns from law-abiding citizens, that's what you're arguing for. Now, you can point to places like New York, which passed the SAFE Act, which does, in fact, register or ban most of the weapons and magazines that all the gun banners want to ban and register. But that law has been on the books for a while now. The compliance rate is estimated at 4%. 4%, folks. Do you know how many armed raiding parties have gone around the state of New York and kicked down doors at 3 o'clock in the morning? I haven't heard of any. None. Maybe you should think about why that is. Maybe there's a reason that despite all the bluster and BS from Bloomberg and Cuomo and all those other people, all the people on the left, all the people tell you how terrible firearms are. Maybe they can do arithmetic. Maybe they can take 3 million Americans and figure out how many of them live in New York, and they know that they have to commit that many murders to get what they want, and they're not willing to do it. So let's get down to brass tacks and just cut the BS. Nobody is pro-murder, except for maybe a few crazies. No one else. I'm not, you're not, people on the left aren't, people on the right aren't. None of us want to see that happen. But there are a substantial percentage of the American population, a very small percentage in percent terms, but because this is a nation of 330 million people, it's millions of individuals that really believe that the Second Amendment means what it says. And they are not going to give you any of their firearms, ever. You're going to have to come take them. And to get them, you're going to have to murder those people. That's the only way it's going to happen. So, are you really opposed to homicide? If you support banning guns or banning magazines or any other sort of firearm ban, we're talking about guns that are in common circulation right now, and millions of them. There are, in fact, by some estimates, more firearms in the hands of the American population than there are people, and billions of rounds of ammunition. You don't know which of those people will give them up and which will not. There's no way to know in advance. You're going to find out the hard way. And as soon as it starts, no one that you've told that you're going to shoot, when they see that you're actually serious, is just going to sit in their living room and wait for you to come kill them. That's basic logic too. So if we want to actually address gun violence and gun homicides, let's stop with the BS and start talking about the truth. Let's stop putting up signs that say gun-free zone. Because when you put up a sign that says gun-free zone, what you're really saying is to a mass murderer, enter here. Nobody can resist what you're about to do. Let's start looking at people. When the FBI gets a phone call from a person who knows someone, not just a random citizen, but someone who actually knows someone and says, hey, this guy's planning to shoot up a school, and they sit on that information, let's hold them accountable for the murders that occur as a consequence. When you have a sheriff that gets called over 24 times to somebody's residence and, in fact, gets a complaint that somebody put a gun to someone's head, that is a felony assault, ladies and gentlemen, and does not arrest that person, even though that's a crime, let's hold them accountable. Let's stop making excuses for so-called police officers who, when the shooting starts, even though they are armed and wearing body armor, cower outside instead of going in and confronting the person who is at that instant demonstrating their intent and willingness and capacity to commit mass murder. Let's stop making excuses for those people. Let's stop making excuses for agencies such as happened at Pulse, where they had reports that this individual was becoming radicalized and was possibly going to do something awful. And they had his father on the payroll as a confidential informant. He said, oh, no, everything's okay. That was enough? Obviously not, right? We see multiple instances of this. The crazies that tried to shoot up the Draw Muhammad contest, the FBI was literally behind them, following them, and didn't arrest. Folks, there's a lot of things wrong in this country, and there are a lot of things we can do. We can address the drug addiction problems. We can address the way we have drug laws in this country, which is tied to a huge number of gun homicides and drug dealers fighting over turf. We can do a lot of things that would be productive and would make a very meaningful difference. In fact, just taking on the drug-related violence, if we were to decriminalize, regulate, and help those people who are addicted to drugs, as well as taking drugs that are non-addictive, such as marijuana, completely off the federal schedules entirely, would save far more than 100 lives a year in reduced gun violence. That's more people than are killed every year with these evil black rifles, and we would not have to ban a single firearm. So are we really worried here about people being shot? Is that really the problem? Or is it something else? When you hear people get up on TV and talk about gun control and talk about wanting to have common sense measures, just remember this. Every one of those individuals is telling you they're willing to murder millions of Americans to get what they want. Maybe you can tell me or ask them to explain how they square that statement, their desire to reduce homicides, with the willingness to kill millions of Americans. I'm your ticker guy, and that's my view.